This is the County Authority on Land Use Public Forum, co-hosted by the League of Women Voters Comal Area and the Preston Memorial Library. I'm Jerry Champlin, president of the local league. I want to thank the library for their technical support, which has made this our first hybrid meeting possible. And as I said, thank you for your patience with the technical issues. This is the first time we're trying to do a live meeting while also live streaming it on Zoom and Facebook Live, and also recording it so that we can post it to our YouTube channel later and more people can see it. Many of you already know that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit 501c3. We do not support or oppose any candidate or political party at any level of government. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. As part of that mission, we provide educational programs like the one today about issues of concern to our communities. Land use is a very important one for our local league. Conservation of our natural resources in the Comal area has been a focus of the local league for several years. And you can find our 2017 land use study on our website, lwvcomal.org. We support land use decisions by local governments that conserve the natural and historic resources of our area, and that include appropriate planning for the impact of growth across the region to maintain our quality of life. Many of us live in unincorporated areas where development is subject to county rather than municipal government. We are pleased today to bring together these three presenters with a great deal of knowledge and experience to share about county authority and land use. They are County Commissioner from Precinct 4, Jen Crownover, President of one of the League's community partners, the Comal County Conservation Alliance, Elizabeth Bowerman, and the Executive Director of another community partner, the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance, Annalisa Peace. Each of them will give a brief presentation. I ask that you hold your questions until all three presentations are done. We will have, I think, ample time for questions and answers. We do have to finish by 1:30. And Zoom viewers can put questions in chat and Facebook Live in comments, and we will try to pick those up. With that, we will start with Jen Crownover.
Okay, thank y'all so much for coming. I want to welcome y'all, and it's exciting to see such an incredible turnout. I appreciate the excitement and the curiosity on this subject. It's complex and in some ways, and it's simple in others. So I want to start by having everybody raise your hands. Just bear with me, play along with me if you don't mind. Just indulge all of us. It's going to be fun. So for anybody who has lived here more than 20 years, put your hand down. Down. If you've lived here more than 20 years, put your hand down. Everybody else stays standing. If you've lived here more than 15 years, put your hand down. Okay. If you've lived here more than 10 years, put your hand down. Still lots of hands. Okay, how about 7 years? Okay, 5. Still quite a few hands. 3, 2, 1. So my point being is that we are the second fastest growing county in the nation, and we have been for many, many years. There's a lot of us that have been here for a very long time, and there's a lot of us who've just newly arrived. One other question, and this one is just to raise your hand. When the people, everybody who's moved here, did you raise your hand if you moved here from a municipality? So from a city, and then you moved out into the county, that's a majority right there. Okay. So, and the reason that I bring that up is just to kind of give y'all a little bit of background and some County 101. The county government is basically a local branch of state government. It was set up by the state constitution. And all of our authority, the things that we can do, comes from statute. So if it's not in statute, we cannot do it. It's kind of, in a way, it's a mother may I government. We're like local branch of state. So where cities are completely the opposite. As long as it's not against the law and the city goes through the proper procedures and vets their ordinances and stuff like that, they can do it. So it's very opposite. One of the examples that I give is my purple houses example. So let's say Comal County says, you know, we've got all these great high schools and you know, we got all this good teamwork and excitement, and we want to ban purple houses because that's San Marcos, that's Hayes County. Okay, just bear with me for the sake of the example. So we want to ban purple houses in Comal County. What would we have to do to get the authority to ban purple houses in Comal County? Well, we would have to appeal to our state representative, our state senator, to draft some legislation to get passed through their legislative session to ban purple houses in Comal County. So they would have to draft this legislation. They would have to seek the support of their colleagues in the House of Representatives, in the state Senate, and get that support so that they could win it by the votes. And then from there, it would have to get signed by the governor. And then at that point, we now have the authority to ban purple houses in Comal County. Okay. Now, if the city of New Braunfels said, we want to ban purple houses, what they would have to do is research the law and make sure it's not illegal to ban purple houses. Once they clear that hurdle, they draft an ordinance, they have a couple of public hearings, and the support of the community is there, they vote, and they can now ban purple houses by establishing that ordinance. So it's very, very different. You can see how cities are kind of from the bottom up, and the county is a mother may I system where it's from the top down. So that is the difference in our authority and how our authorities come to be. As far as land use, our land use comes from the statute of Local Government Code, Chapter 232. That outlines most of what you have to deal with when it comes to subdivision regulations. From there, we go through that statute, we devise our subdivision regulations, and as long as it goes according to that statute, and there are a couple others that pertain to it. There's water code and some other things. We have our subdivision regulation. So in this, Texas is a classically property rights state. So all of us, we own to our fence line. You know what happens on the lot next door, we can't prevent the owner of the lot next door from building a house. Okay, if we back up to a fence line, we all have to kind of accept the reality that at some point that ownership could change, the purpose for that property could change, and as long as they're not breaking any laws, they're completely allowed to do those things because that is the authority that we have from the statute. So there's a lot of frustration with that. You know, there's people that, you know, they buy a house and they're surrounded by vacant lots. They either buy another lot just to expand what they have, or, you know, they accept the reality that they're going to have a neighbor someday. When people buy up against a large tract of land, you know, a lot of these families have had these lands in their families for a very, very long time. Not all these families are able to keep them. And sometimes the developer dies. So I can answer some specific questions when it comes to the subdivision regulations as y'all decide on those, and as you hear the other presenters, we're going to take questions afterwards. But one of the things, and one of the frequent questions that we've had when we have some people that live on lovely dead-end streets. So there's a difference, and part of our subdivision regulations is that there would be some stub outs as developers come in and they build these roads that for the future expansion of a specific neighborhood or for connectivity later. A lot of these things are favorable from law enforcement, from emergency responders, the school systems with the buses, the mail systems, all of these other things that play into connectivity. That is one of the reasons for that. And a lot of people, they live on a nice dead end. They don't always realize the difference between a cul-de-sac and a stub out. So I want to show y'all. So this is an example in my precinct. These are cul-de-sacs. Cul-de-sacs have the pie slice type of style of lots. They don't back up to a large parcel of property. Whereas. Okay, so in this example, we have actually two cul-de-sacs. And then we have a stub out. And that's the difference. Now, people, they see the bulb in the end of the road and they were, it looks like a cul-de-sac. There is actually history on why we have those large turnarounds. There was about 20 or so years ago, there was actually a fatality in one of the subdivisions where there was just a straight road that dead ended into a fence, like a normal stub out would look like. And there was school bus service. School bus picked up the kid at the end of the street, had no way to turn around in that small area, backed up, and a lady was actually run over and killed in that situation. At that point, the county moving forward and actually even improving on some of these stub outs made to where there's an accurate and appropriate radius for delivery trucks, buses, any of those things to safely turn around and to prevent something tragic like that from ever happening again. So that's one of the reasons that it looks like a cul-de-sac, but it's actually not. And then in just another example. Well, it's basically another stub out. But these are actually required in our subdivision regulations that every half a mile or so, as it is deemed practical by the topography of whichever property is being developed, that there would be stub outs. And that comes from all the safety planning and everything else. I have many neighborhoods in my precinct that have one way in and one way out. And the two things that we're the most susceptible to in Comal County are floods and fires. And if some of these neighborhoods have something bad go down, these people don't have a way out. And this has happened. This has happened during the flood of 98, flood of 02. There were several neighborhoods that were landlocked and they couldn't get out. God forbid that there was a fire, but that is a huge concern. And I get a lot of calls from people in my precinct asking, hey, is there any planning for another exit to my neighborhood? Because what if this kind of thing happens? Can't tell you how many of those phone calls I got during the Bastrop fires. It scares people, and rightly so. And one of the things I tell them is like, yeah, you see that big piece of property at the end of the fence at the end of the road. When Joe developer comes in and says, hey, I've got plans for this place, then yeah, you're probably going to have a new way in and out of your neighborhood. And so a lot of people don't see the downside, and I understand the privacy and the serenity of different neighborhoods, and you buy into it at a point in time where you want it to stay how it is, and don't we all? But the reality is, in the second fastest growing county in the nation, that probably is going to change eventually. And as long as these people are following the laws, the counties do not have the authority to stop them. So with that, I guess I'll pass it to you, and then we'll shuffle and do what we need to do.
I'd like to thank the league also, and thank Preston Memorial Library for having this event. I think it's really important in the county, and I'm so glad that I can be here representing CCCA and having an input. My portion, oh, that's better, isn't it? My portion of the talk is to talk about what the detrimental effects of a lack of county authority have on our county. But before we talk about the problems that are caused by the lack of county authority, let's look at what's been happening in the county and why we might be looking at this as a problem now, where it wasn't perhaps in the past. A little history about the area. Jen's example of put your hands up or put your hands down, it really points out the fact that there are people who have lived here for many years. I was going to say generations, but their families have been here for generations, and they've been here all their lives. And then there are those of us who moved here because it was a beautiful place to live, or we for some reason we had another draw to the area. The history of the area is that the unincorporated area of the county was agricultural for its first 100 years. It was farming, ranching, and lots of open natural areas. There were large properties, small population, and the people were more self-sufficient in those days. There was little reliance on government services, and people had a common priority, or common priorities even. There's lots of open space over the aquifer recharge zone, so there was plenty of water for people to drink. And people depended on the natural systems for clean water, clean air, and wildlife habitat. Since the mid-1990s, our county has seen more people, more homes, more schools, children, traffic, and the breakup of larger properties into smaller lots. Increasingly, we've had more use of commercial water providers. There's also been increased subdivisions, businesses, parking lots, and industry, all of which means more impervious cover over the aquifer. There's also been an increased need for county services like fire, police, and EMT. And we're seeing increases in drainage and flooding issues and road runoff pollution. And let's narrow it down even a little closer. Since 2010, our population has been growing rapidly, either the first or second fastest growing county in the nation. Between 2010 and 2020, Comal County's population grew by almost 50%. Isn't that a staggering number? Then between 2020 and 2021, the population grew another 8.35% actually. And I was going to say, remind again that we've been in the top 1 or 2 counties for fastest growing competition in the last 5 years. This puts increasing pressure on our water quality and quantity and has increased runoff pollution from vehicles on the road. More people means more cars, right? We're seeing increased air pollution from the traffic and industry and increased flooding and drainage problems. There's also increased artificial lighting that disturbs residents and interferes with bird and other wildlife migration and diminishes the dark skies, the starry skies that we used to be able to see. There's also an increase in fragmentation and subdivision of the natural areas. And the problem with this is that it limits the wildlife mobility, restricting their wildlife's ability to get to their food and water sources, to get to their breeding grounds, and to find suitable shelter when they need it. And eventually this leads to starvation and inbreeding, making them less healthy and more vulnerable to disease and long-term genetic disabilities. Much of the unincorporated area still depends on natural systems to clean the air and water and provide outdoor recreation and wildlife habitat. We all understand why people want to live here. It's the same reason most of us came here and continue to live here. It's full of charming areas, rural charm, rural history, beautiful natural areas, clear springs and rivers, fresh air, and recreational opportunities. So it's no wonder the population has been increasing, but the challenges brought by this growth are also increasing and getting more serious given the environmental sensitivity of the landscape of the hill country. Recent studies of growth of the hill country are predicting that if we don't change the way we grow, we could get past the tipping point where our natural resources are irreparably damaged. That's pretty heavy, isn't it? Implying that there's a tipping point and that the clock is ticking. We're approaching that tipping point. And you know what? Isn't this what they call killing the goose that laid the golden egg? Yeah, sort of sounds like it. So what exactly is the problem? I think the 2 biggest problems from the lack of county authority are the issue of water quality and quantity and the issue of air quality. Can we agree on that? Now, there are a lot of other problems, but I'd say this is the one that affects the biggest number of people in the most severe ways. Water and air are pretty important. So let's look at water issues. 40% of Comal County is over the recharge zone of the Edwards Aquifer. We depend on that water. Many property owners get their water from private wells drilled into the Edwards or Trinity Aquifer, but our county government has no way of protecting the aquifers. Without the authority to regulate development over the recharge zone, impervious cover will increasingly block surface water from entering the aquifer to replenish it. The water will run off and drain into the rivers and creeks that flow on down to the Gulf of Mexico. Uncontrolled residential developments over the recharge zone, especially high-density developments, means more people using the now limited amount of water available in the aquifer. We're actually over obligating our shrinking water resource. And I think this summer got a lot of people's attention and brought a really sharp focus on that issue. But this is not a sustainable situation to be over obligating our shrinking water resource. The quality of water in the aquifer is also at risk since county officials cannot control development over the recharge zone. The risk of increased pollution from both the discharge of treated wastewater from the growing number of residents and the increased number of vehicles from the families that move into the new subdivisions, right? Land application and direct dumping of treated wastewater into the local creeks, dry creeks, streams, and rivers that flow across the recharge zone take this water directly into our aquifer. And without county authority to restrict certain types of businesses and industries from being built over the aquifer recharge zone, dangerous chemicals and other pollutants could end up in our drinking water. And since income from tourists is a significant part of the county's income, spoiling the quality or quantity of our county's rivers and springs would seriously harm our recreation and tourism industries and economies and would probably reduce property values. All right, air quality. We all know that natural areas, especially trees, clean our air, right? They absorb the carbon dioxide from the air and they produce the oxygen we breathe. Without the authority to regulate minimum lot sizes or require that minimum percentage of natural areas be retained in our subdivisions, or to restrict the practice of clear-cutting natural vegetation, our county cannot keep this natural ecosystem functioning properly. But these natural systems can only do too much, and some industries create more air pollution than our natural system can clean. Since our county commissioners don't have the authority to prevent a rock quarry, for example, or an industrial facility from being built adjacent to existing homes, homeowners have no assurance that they can continue to enjoy safe, fresh air on their property, or that their property values won't be reduced by the presence of dangerous or noxious offputs from a business moving in next door. The same air quality vulnerability applies to schools near quarries and other types of aggregate facilities, thereby putting our children at risk. These are problems that are happening now. These aren't make-believe. These aren't something that's coming in the future, but they're going to get worse. Unlike counties in the rest of the country, counties in Texas have very limited authority and generally do not have the authority to take action to protect land values, let alone air quality and water quality issues. We're getting very close to that tipping point when it comes to protecting what we love and protecting the resources we depend on in Comal County. Having more authority for our county officials would help us keep from passing that tipping point.
Yeah, so I'm Annalisa Peace. I'm Executive Director of the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance. We're an alliance of 54 member groups that goes throughout 21 counties. And I see several people from our member groups here. Thank you for coming and thanks for being a GIA member group. So I'm going to talk about options and tools that counties could use because what we're seeing now, frankly, is uncivilized going on in these unincorporated areas. It's a free-for-all.
And play. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, so, but you know, Texas Monthly back in the 90s did a poll of Texans, and they said that 90% of Texans said they wanted to retire to the hill country. And that's kind of where we are today. So we're literally loving it to death. And if you see this, this is kind of alarming because these maps project, if we continue at the level of development in 2007, this map on the bottom is showing pretty much the whole area. That orange is suburban development. So what are the attendant problems? And y'all know because you're dealing with it: traffic, inappropriate scales of development, incompatible land uses, and flooding. And we are in flash flood alley, and flash flooding is actually a natural occurrence for this area because of the geology, but it's really being exaggerated because when we're paving over the recharge zone and we do that impervious cover and the water can't sink into the land, we're just adding so much more volume during those flash floods. So that's, we are like the one, actually not just nationwide, worldwide known for the flooding. So, in Texas, sorry, I don't know how to get rid of that top bar there, but counties, as you've heard from Jen, have really limited authority. They lack authority to manage stormwater and control flooding at the local level without any new mechanism to require that new developments pay for themselves. All citizens pay for new infrastructure to accommodate growth. Counties cannot preserve the health, safety, and quality of life for their citizens by prohibiting incompatible land uses. And I know a lot of y'all are dealing with that right now. They're not giving the tools to protect critical watersheds that replenish local karst aquifers, which are exceptionally vulnerable to pollution. Our karst aquifers, the Edwards and the Trinity, do not filter the water that goes into them. So whatever runs across the land goes straight into our groundwater supply. And counties are not given adequate tools to set minimum standards for water and wastewater infrastructure and emergency services. So according to the American Planning Association, the support for planning across all political interests, 57% believe that communities can manage growth and protect private property rights at the same time. And private property right protection is the reason that the legislature gives us for really limiting authorities in the unincorporated area. Thank you.
I was gonna try to get rid of that, but this isn't cooperating. Oh. All right, never mind.
Okay. So what do we have? We have some additional powers that would be helpful to Texas' fastest growing county. And Chief, what we would really like to see is the ability for counties to set standards for water and wastewater systems, to require minimum fire suppression systems, to require improvements to roads and streets, the ability to require minimum amount of open space, or imposing a limit of the amount of impervious cover for aquifer recharge and stormwater management, the ability to require vegetative buffers or adopt other measures to minimize conflict between incompatible land uses, the ability to assess impact fees that can pay for new infrastructure required to serve new developments, providing specific authority to regulate population density as determined by minimum or average lot sizes within a designated area. And that's a problem that we're seeing more and more in the counties that we serve, is that people are on large lot subdivisions, subdivisions coming in that want to put in like 6 houses per acre, which is just a whole lot of growth in an area that can't sustain it. And requirements for supplies of water to be contractually obligated to provide a sufficient supply of water during normal and drought conditions. And we have seen communities within our area having to truck water during extreme droughts. So that would prevent that. We believe that all legislation should include a requirement that the Commissioner's Court must place any proposed new powers on a ballot so that y'all could vote on it. And no new powers would accrue to a county without that approval. Oops, it's not. It's not advancing anymore. Yeah, sorry.
It's not. It's strange on Zoom. It doesn't show all this stuff.
Oh, good.
Oh.
Thank you. So, yeah, limited zoning authority would allow counties to promote development according to compatible land uses and thus prevent land use, oh, that thing's there, land use that's inappropriate while attracting continued growth and development. Counties wouldn't really need to do the comprehensive zoning and planning that cities do. One county commissioner suggested that 4 categories of land use would be enough to resolve many of the county's land use conflicts. Counties could use this authority to shift heavy industrial development away from residential and environmentally vulnerable areas. And here you see, this is in Bear County. It's the Martin Marietta that's overlooking a neighborhood. So impact fees are important too. An impact fee is a charge levied on new development to cover the cost of capital improvements or public infrastructure expansion necessitated by the new development. With few exceptions, counties lack the authority to charge impact fees. Impact fees could be used to build or extend new roadways to accommodate increased traffic. They could be used for comprehensive stormwater planning. And some studies, indicate that increases in local county taxes rise proportionally with increased suburban development. According to a study on the cost of community services for Hayes County, the cost of services for residential development outstrips the amount of an additional tax revenue by the ratio of $1.26 spent for each dollar collected from the new growth. On the con side, most counties lack the professional resources or staff to calculate impact fees in a manner required of cities under the local government code. Now, we believe that it's past time for the state of Texas to revise the requirements and limits that they place on impact fees, both for municipalities and in the event that the counties would be able to use that tool, because it's frankly favoring vested interests. So it very much limits the amount all across Texas of what can be collected to pay for that new growth. So the most important tools for water quantity and quality is the ability to require a minimum amount of open space and impervious cover limit on the aquifer recharge zone. Stormwater management would address concerns of diminishing water quality and decreased flooding. And the experts tell us on the recharge zone, really, to be safe, impervious cover should be limited from 8 to 15%. So, and that is not what we're seeing here. And that's for concerns of, well, basically they tell us that the least people producing sewage on the aquifer recharge zone, the better off we are. And then the stormwater runoff is polluted from urban development. So the ability to set standards for water and wastewater systems would ensure adequate water supplies and collect water quality. Limiting density in the Edwards and Trinity aquifer recharge zones would protect our groundwater supply. Requiring subdivision restrictions that promote water saving landscapes would be great. Providing specific authority to regulate population density as determined by minimum or average lot sizes within a designated area, and requirements that supplier of water be contractually obligated to actually provide sufficient water in the long term. So we've had some past legislative events, and I don't know why these came up yellow on this, but we had in 2005, 2 bills filed by Wentworth and Castile, which are y'all's representatives. Then in 2007, Rose, Howard, and Hildebrand, and that was actually from Kerrville, Hayes County, and Travis County. Then in 2009, Rose, Doug Miller, and Gallego, that was from Travis County, Hayes County, and Comal County. And then last session was Biederman, which was y'all's representative as well. Some of those made it fairly far. We did have on the 2005, 2007, 2009, 9 counties, including Comal, signed on to resolutions of support for this legislation. So we do need resolutions from the commissioners' courts in support of that legislation. We don't like to go with proposals and then they come back and y'all's own representatives don't want it. We need commitment from local legislators to sponsor the legislation. This session, a bill must be drafted before March 10th, 2022 to be considered by the legislature. So that leaves a very short timeline. And 23, sorry. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it is a very short time. And y'all can go back and look through this. This lays out the process that a bill goes through to be considered. And even before, you know, the bill is actually filed, the legislator needs to give it to the legislative council to draft the bill language and all. So, you know, we're kind of behind the race here. And the legislative session, I swear it's from January to May every 2 years. So I always say it's like an all-night poker game that goes on for 5 months. I mean, it's pretty intense. So, you know, here's the call to action. You can contact your Comal County commissioners and ask them to develop and adopt some local options and pass resolutions that can be sent to the legislature. These resolutions will be needed to be submitted like right away. And so that would affirm, you know, and you could do this cafeteria style. It doesn't have to be for the whole hill country. In the past, those past legislation included anywhere from 15 to 9 counties, but it's conceivable that you could do it for just Comal County and ask for some authority that's needed. And then you need to contact your state representative or senator, because it's really best if these bills are filed by the representatives who represent those areas. So what we're facing here, and this is across our whole service area for the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance, it's rapid regional population and urban growth, which is going to continue, of multiple jurisdictions with no coherent plan for vision of the region, publicly funded infrastructure projects that encourage growth in sensitive areas, and no land use powers. And so we're here to help however we can with like I said, imposing some civilization on the growth that's coming. So for more information, you can contact us. Thank you.
Well, now we'll open it up for questions.
I've been aware of a petition that some friends have sent me. I live on the south side of the lake. They live on the north side. I know there's an issue with a development that's trying to happen there. Is that petition that they're proposing going through the county, or does that have any guidelines of what they're asking, or what is the deal with that petition? Are y'all familiar with what I'm talking about?
I have seen the petition, and it is basically opposing one of the new subdivisions that's being in the proposal stage right now, and it's opposing also the road connectivity from their stub out essentially. And that brings up a couple of points that I want to make, and right out of the local government code that I referenced to you guys. There are specific rules in that chapter 232, and I'm just going to read you a couple of them so that you know what we're dealing with. It says, unless otherwise authorized by state law, the Commissioner's Court shall not regulate under this section the use of building or property for businesses, industrial, residential, or other purposes, the bulk, height, or number of buildings constructed on a particular tract of land, the size of a building that can be constructed on a particular tract of land, including without limitation and restriction on the ratio of building floor space to the land square footage, which is your impervious cover. And then the other one is the number of residential units that can be built per acre of land. Those are rules right out of the statute. And we don't have the authority as in the county to buck this system. So.
Yeah, a lot of them want to do that. Yeah,
I'm sure there are.
yeah.
I mean, I know.
That means what Hays County's doing is illegal.
Okay, but I need to get other ones.
I'll quickly respond to the petition. I authored the petition regarding Canyon Ranch 400, asking for minimum 1 acre lot size. And I know you guys currently cannot do anything about that. The purpose for that petition, we plan to go to the developer, we plan to go to B.R. Horton with petition to ask for some relief in that regard. The only other thing, and the other petition about the cut through is a separate petition to the county
I'm
commissioners.
only
court.
aware of one.
Okay, well, there's actually 2.
Okay.
But they are separate. So the only other thing I'd like to add is there are some counties in the state who currently have guidelines through chapter Code 231 in regards to recreational areas, which this should be considered a recreational area for sure, because it's a destination place for a lot of people, not just residents, but throughout the tourist time, who have ability to restrict lot size. I'll be glad to share that with you.
And I've read it. I've read it.
And I would like to also share that Bandera County has lot size restrictions currently in place as well. I can share that document with you as well. You have Bear counties? I mean, Bandera County? Okay. So then my question is, what is being done from the Comal County Commissioner's Court to work towards exactly what this piece and the other lady has represented as the issues here? We know growth is coming, we know growth is inevitable, but it's got to be responsible and it's got to be within the guidelines of our resources. So, thank you.
So with regard to lot size, there are different categories of lot sizes that a developer can opt for. And so if they choose not to provide public water or public wastewater, then their minimum lot size is 5 acres or more. That would require the person who's buying the property to have their own well and their own septic. Now, if a developer is opting for a public water system, such as Canyon Lake Water is just our provider in this area, and they want the residents to do their own septic, then the requirement is 1 acre or more. And if a developer wants to have public water and public wastewater, which you're seeing with some of these high density developments, then they can do that if they do wastewater treatment. And then that wastewater treatment, those plants that they propose, that is out of the county's hands. We regulate the on-site sewage, which is your normal septic systems, but the wastewater treatment that kicks up to the state. And so we don't have a seat at the table in that conversation. So, but one of the advantages, if you will, just bear with me, to the wastewater treatment is that the wastewater is treated at a much higher quality standard than your septic that's sprinkling in your yard. And it's regulated daily and it's operated by professionals. It's not something that Joe homeowner is just has out in their yard, and then once a problem arises, it's already probably way past where the problem started. So the wastewater that's coming out of that is much cleaner. And all up and down the Guadalupe River Basin, there are a lot. All the municipalities have them. Many of the different subdivisions and stuff have wastewater treatment, and all of those things are being recycled. And that's kind of the fact of how the water is handled. So, but that as far as lot sizes, we also are able to enforce some flood mitigation for the impact, and that we do require water availability studies. And those are produced by either the developer and their engineers if they're going to provide their own, or the water company itself to certify that they have that water supply for the new subdivisions that are being proposed. And one of the misconceptions on that, especially in light of us being under drought restrictions, is that water supply and drought versus flood are completely separate considerations at the state level. So yes, while we've been on water restrictions and all those types of things, the water supply itself is still considered healthy, and the water providers are still able to certify that they have that water supply for everything as it would be maximum, as it would be built out at the maximum level, plus whatever they're going to take into their system. So that's how that water availability is considered. And then also road specifications, we are able to require road quality and everything else. And we don't build the roads, the developers do. So they do that out of their pocket, and that is passed on to the people who buy into those subdivisions. So that's another misconception sometimes, but anyways.
We'll take another question back here. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentations. I live on the south side. I happen to live in a lot that has canyon-like water supply and have my own septic system that's there. It's a relatively new house. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Okay, great. All right, so one of the speakers earlier said that 57% of people believe the rights of landowners can be protected and still add, I'll call them regulations. I'd like to understand how that poll or how that number was arrived at. Maybe it was mentioned earlier, I came in late. And I'd also like to understand how landowners' rights and their attendant economic interests are protected with all the new rules that are being proposed as to add with guidances and what incentives. And I'm not a big landowner in Comal County, so I'm not asking it from my own perspective. What incentives are there for land taken out of potential development to a landowner who's got a large tract? Would they not be grandfathered? Would it be a question? And would it not be considered a taking relative to getting some of these things passed and discussed? Because I can see that as an issue that a landowner would request. So thank you for hearing my questions.
Sure. I'll answer the last one first, and then you'll have to remind me because you had a lot of questions in there. But there are the opportunity to actually do permanent preservation, and there are several programs that will actually pay the landowner to put a conservation easement on their property. There's also very generous tax implications. So tax deductions that can be taken out over a period of time to allow the landowner, so that it's not a takings, and we're very aware we don't want to be imposing. Now, when you asked about the grandfathering, typically the grandfathering kicks in Texas. Texas very liberal with grandfathering, so that is to say that we can't regulate something that's already in the works. So if there's already a plat approved, if there's a utility service agreement for water or wastewater, those would trigger grandfathering. But if there are no plans for development, then that land would come in under the new regulations. And I will tell you the grandfathering is very generous, because we passed in San Antonio, we passed our water quality ordinances in 1995, and we are still having projects that come up that say they're grandfathered. So Texas is very liberal on that. And you had one other question?
Yes, an earlier speaker mentioned that 57% of people, I wondered where do those.
Right, that came from a study that was done by the American Planning Association, and I do not have the methodology on that. But let's see, let's do in this room a show of hands. How many of y'all think that we can achieve a balance between having good regional planning and protecting private property rights? Raise your hand. Okay, so that's more than 50% in this room. Thank you.
I'm gonna have one question here from the the Zoom, since any bill must pass the state legislature, why is proposing legislation specific to a few counties more likely to succeed than seeking broader authority for counties statewide?
Yeah, because the legislature, okay, these bills go to committee. The committee can determine that it is a local and consent bill, which means that it can be passed by committee rather than having to go through the full approval of the House and Senate. And that's, going for full approval is really problematic because in any given session, you have about 3,000 bills filed, and they will only actually vote on a small percentage of that. But if it was just confined to, say, Comal County and some of your neighboring counties, like the past bills have been, it's eligible to go for local and consent and just be passed by acclamation, basically.
Can you hear me? This question is for Jen's Precinct 4 Commissioner. 8 days ago, TCEQ published their usual drought map on there was Guadalupe Basin. We are ground zero on Guadalupe Basin, if you're not familiar with it. About 16 months ago, TCEQ approved a mud application for 1,600 residents location off of 306 near where my wife and I reside, Cascada. This application includes 1.7 billion, that's a B, in refunding bonds with 1,600 homes. That comes out to be $26,000 per home per year in impact fees, user fees, whatever you want to call them. Somebody's going to have to pay that over the course of 40 years. Along with another $5,000 in your county and state property taxes, and another $2,000 a year in usage of your water and wastewater for a mud, you're talking about $35,000 a year for a $500,000 home. My question is, in light of all the water restrictions and also in light of the obvious terrible fiscal situation, is it possible to go through our county commissioners court and go through our state representative, state senators to petition TCEQ to rescind that mud application that was approved 16 months ago? That would cut off that whole situation of a high density population in that area. Question.
So to take a bite of it at a time, one of the things that you mentioned is the mud application. That is a buyer beware situation. That is those bonds that they would be applying for, it only applies to the property that it affects. It does not apply to the neighboring properties. It doesn't apply to any of the other residents of the county. When they buy into that, they buy into a mud and buyer beware. And as far as to petition TCEQ, that is in their it's in their court at this point, as far as the approval process. And it is, the county does not have a seat at that table. I mean, if I had it to go and dump out of the bucket, I would dump TCEQ out of the bucket and put it back together from scratch, because it is not something that serves the local constituency, and it's very, very frustrating for all of us.
I am a resident, this gentleman. Okay, now can you hear me? Closer, okay, all right. So my question is for the developers, as far as the environmental impact is concerned. What kind of environmental impacts studies have been done to look after the wildlife? Golden cheek warbler is possibly going to be extinct because of this. What is their responsibility, and where can we access the findings?
Yeah, so Comal County actually has a habitat conservation plan to protect the warblers. So developers are required to do a study, to submit a study that whether or not there are these endangered species on their properties. We have seen where they actually do the studies when the birds are migrating, so they're not there. But no, so a developer does have the opportunity to buy into that habitat conservation plan that Comal County has. They have to pay so much per acre, and that land can be used to purchase land for endangered species to offset that. And so that's one tool that you have in Comal County. Now, Fish and Wildlife has told us personally that we've had numerous cases within our service area where we know that the endangered species are there. Whatever project developer they did not get a take permit. They have the opportunity to buy into like your habitat conservation plan or to apply to Fish and Wildlife for a take permit on their own, and they just ignore it. And we've had the staff of Fish and Wildlife say, please sue us so that we can enforce the law. So at the federal level, that oversight is really lacking. Yeah.
Yes, you have to sue them.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first, with all due respect, you seem to be standing behind the existing statutes. What is the Commissioner's Court doing to enforce or promote changing those statutes so that we do have control? Secondly, you've spoken about the developer's rights. What about our rights as existing property owners, where their wastewater treatment plant outflow is going to go directly across our properties? What about our rights?
I'm going to repeat the question because the people on Zoom can't always hear. The first one was asking what the county commissioners are doing now to change the legislation.
Correct.
And the second part was, what about the property rights of the current property owners that are being impacted by development?
As far as changing the statutes, that's where relationships are super important. Relationships with our state senator and with other state senators in the area, and relationships with our state representatives and other friendly state representatives, so that we can educate them on the actual impact of bills that they either are or are not passing. So there's a lot of us that spend a lot of time in Austin testifying on good bills to pass good bills and also blocking bad bills. Because with everything that is proposed, there is a consequence, and sometimes the legislature, they're tasked with thinking through what those impacts are, and sometimes there's some unforeseen stuff, and that's where we're very, very active at the county level to visit with our state representatives to push the good bills and block the bad ones.
Can we make that more public? Because we don't see it. Right. These two ladies have laid out a perfect argument for the state to change. But what's happening?
Well,
Just relationships.
yeah, absolutely. And everybody that I get emails constantly asking, hey, what can we do? I'm like, there's power in numbers and persistence. Yes, I address these things from my vantage point, but I also encourage all of y'all to engage your state rep and your state senator on these different issues as well, because there's power in numbers and in persistence on these issues.
We have to have the backing of the entire county. Just to give you an example, HB 3883, hearings bill in the last legislative session. It had the support of all the other counties in GMA 9 for groundwater management, except for Comal County. Why is that? Why couldn't Comal County come to the table and say, we support this, let's go for it? I think it would have made a difference if that would have happened.
Okay, the question was about a specific piece of legislation on groundwater management. It came before the legislation that was supported by 9 other counties.
No,
By all the other counties in GMA 9. which is
Oh,
groundwater.
okay, all the other counties in GMA 9 except Comal County.
Well, my question, you know, I know, I believe you supported it too, but why can't we get the rest of our commissioners on it? We're having a problem.
I can't speak for the others.
And I
But
realize that you're the only one here today.
thanks, y'all. Love it. Yeah. I think that some of these bills, the communication does go both ways. And, you know, where sometimes we communicate as a unit, as a court, or we have put something on an agenda and pass it. There's also a lot of singular conversations that happen. And so I, you know, was in conversation with Kyle and some stuff, and there was some good stuff in that bill, certainly. And then there was some stuff that was some concern. And that may have been, you know, part of the reason that there wasn't more traction with the rest of the court, but like I said, I cannot and will not speak for them. And then I wanted to get back to your other question. I apologize for that, about existing property owners. I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of misinformation about the impact of some of these projects. I'm not saying that I hate high density. Okay, let me just put that out there. I don't feel like it's compatible in the unincorporated areas. But, you know, as I read straight from the statute, we do not have the authority, and as long as a developer feels like that they've got a product that will sell, then they have that right. Do I agree with do I agree with it? No, I think that it should be more, there should be better stewardship of the property, especially in the unincorporated area. I feel like we should have better stewardship of our resources, and I don't think that high density fits that bill. But as far as the wastewater, you know, I tried to allude to the fact that at least the water that's coming out of it is cleaner than what the tens of thousands of septic systems throughout the county are putting out. One of the things that's been blown way out of proportion is the actual quantity of the discharge. And I ran some numbers, I did some math on it the other day, and I probably left that on my desk. But the Simmons plant, in the proposed subdivision up on 281 and 306, the actual outflow of that, if it was discharging at its maximum permit load, is the equivalent of a 3-inch PVC pipe. And I think where a lot of the confusion is within the residents and stuff, number one, they said that people are going around calling it treated sewage. It's not. It's wastewater treatment. It is clean water, the sludge and everything. It's not sewage getting dumped out. I'm sorry, that's just not accurate. As far as the quantity, most of us think cubic feet per second because we relate it to the river. So when we see these numbers, 500,000 gallons per day, we equate it in our minds to cubic feet per second, because that is what we're familiar with. That's what we look for river and lake conditions. That's our reality that we deal with. When you go to calculate what that actually is for cubic feet per second, and I ran the calculation yesterday on the 500,000, it's 0.7 cubic feet per second.
Would you want it running across your backyard?
The reality is, once it's all said and done, there's very little discharge that actually comes out, and it would soak into the ground for the most part by the time it would even get off their property. So that's where I'm trying to let y'all know that a lot of this is blown out of proportion. I'm not defending this as a method, but I am trying to get some facts out there as far as the actual impact. There are other wastewater treatments in the area. There's some in some of the newer subdivisions, and I know Annalisa is on task with all of those things. Very few of them have any kind of flow that is even escaping the property in reality.
Yeah, I just want to, because what's happening here in Comal County is exactly what happened in Northern Bear County like 20, 30 years ago. What you saw was a whole bunch of municipal utility districts building their own infrastructure. A lot of it was over our Edwards Aquifer recharge zone. A lot of that infrastructure isn't very robust. And so what happened was that San Antonio Water Systems had to take over all of those individual systems and incorporate them, integrate them into our system in order to protect the aquifer water supplies. So you know, I know I saw it when I was in Africa, a lot of leapfrog developments, technological developments where people went from landlines, they never had landlines, they went straight to cells. You guys have the opportunity to actually do better and more comprehensive planning, and you should insist that the state enable you to do that, and you will avoid these pitfalls that we've already seen down the road.
You mean? You hear me? You mean? Hello? You mentioned that January is coming when legislation has to be provided. And I'm wondering, do any of you have a list, if you will, of resolutions that neighboring counties have put forth that we could get hold of so that we can go to our county commissioners, ask them to get on board?
The question was whether or not other counties have resolutions already prepared that could be used to take to the Comal County Commission.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
So I don't know that we have just a pocket full of resolutions, but the commissioners and judges across the state, we work very hard to communicate our message to our state representation. And we devise at the regional level and also at the state level, we have a vast list of resolutions, and I would be happy to provide them to you and give you my email address. And some of them do have to do with the exploitation of some of the development, including the way that MUDs are established and stuff like that. So there are specific resolutions that we're doing at the association levels, and that requires the buy-in of the commissioners and judges. And that's where we're working together to really unify behind those messages. So I would be happy. I've got the South Texas stuff. I've got all of them actually. I can send you, but the state association, we just passed our resolutions in October as well.
As far as resolutions specific to this, we do have a draft, and it's basically based on what the resolutions that were signed on in past legislation. So we can certainly put that up. There's a section on GIA's website that's tools for counties, and we can post that on there.
Am I being heard okay?
Yes.
Okay. I guess my two-part question is, Jen, are you and our representatives in Austin passionate about protecting the Canyon Lake area and the Texas Hill Country? Because I can't tell how you really feel, how passionate you are about this topic. No offense. You seem very practical. And I guess that's a good thing, and the folks in Austin, are they an adversary or a partner in this effort? And the second question of previous panelists mentioned a tipping point. Is Canyon Ranch the tipping point? Because I feel like Canyon Lake will never be the same when that's done. Thank you for your
We have two questions with them. One is asking Jen if she's passionate, and if the representatives in Austin seem passionate about preserving the hill country. We'll go with that one first.
Okay. I am a fourth generation Texan and I grew up on a family farm. The fragmentation of property breaks my ever loving heart. Okay, I am passionate about that. I want that farm to stay in my family every bit as much as I want these big properties to stay in the families around here. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so supportive of these organizations, because they're helping people put stuff in conservation easements and protecting those. So yeah, the short answer is I'm very passionate, and I have the lineage and the heritage to prove that. And then as far as our representatives in Austin, I mean, I can't speak for them. I can speak for Jen. But I work very hard to have good rapport with them and have open conversations so that they'll hear our side, the side that I'm carrying for every one of you guys that I see at the grocery store and I see at the gas station and everything else, and that I answer to. And I feel like I do a good job of holding them accountable to carrying the water for the people they work for. County government is very close to the people. I mean, I see you guys out in public all the time. I think as you work your way up into other levels of government, I think some of them do get increasingly detached, and I don't think that's a good thing. But as far as those conversations and that rapport, I do my best. And I mean, Joyce can attest to that. I'm sure that, we've got each other's cell phones. We call each other at night. When something comes up, I fire off an email and let people know. When something comes in from citizens, I'm saying, here's who you contact and here's why. And there's power in numbers and persistence. And oh, by the way, I'm going to do the same thing. So that happens whether it's a state issue with the legislature, whether it's a text dot issue, whether it's a school district issue or whatever it is. My job as a commissioner, a lot of times, is helping navigate those issues. And that's exactly what I do from day to day.
Yeah, so you asked about what the tipping point is, and it's a little bit scary because we really don't know. We don't have the science to tell us that. What we look at when we look at the state regulations and local lack of regulations in protecting our groundwater supplies, they are not adequate to protect it. Southwest Research Institute recently did a study that was commissioned by the city of San Antonio. That was very scary. And so it was looking at the impacts of sewage, all sewage systems, the septic systems, land application and direct discharge in the Helotes Creek waters shed. And that Helotes Creek is an Edwards Aquifer recharge creek. So it was very sobering in that they said that additional wastewater, no matter what method you're using to treat it, would be a direct threat to the aquifer, and they don't know how long it would take, but ultimately it will. Now, we know in other karst systems, there have been outbreaks of cryptosporidium that traveled really, really quickly and killed people. And that's one reason that we're working so hard and taking care of that. But as far as the tipping point, we don't know when it is. There hasn't been enough studies done, but we do know that the scientists are telling us that we cannot keep on going the way we're going.
Thank you both for your response.
We're going to take one more question.
This is the last.
Someone else raise your hand.
Hi. I want to thank you, all the speakers. This has really been enlightening. I know that a lot of us have had a lot of questions. And I think you framed the problem really well. My concern at this point is, other than some philosophical or some good ideas that you put up about what we need to do in the future, I'm not hearing any hard solutions. There are right now, there are things that the county is responsible for. And I haven't heard anybody explain to me, with all of these additional people, what we're going to do about law enforcement, about emergency services, about traffic, about road conditions, those infrastructure, those schools, those are the things the county does have a say in. So if it's been approved for them to bring the subdivision in, I'd like to hear the county's solutions for how you're going to address these issues over the next couple of years.
Earn your raise.
Okay, the question is, are there hard solutions? I'm going to make a comment here. I think what's really clear from the entire discussion is it's really important for citizens to speak up. It's really important for you to speak up at a local government level, state level, federal level. Contact your representatives. They're there to represent you. I've gone to county commission courts where there's maybe 2 or 3 people in the audience. I'm not sure about city council since I live in an unincorporated area. Take action. Let your representatives know what your thoughts are. If they don't hear from you, they're not gonna know. They're gonna listen to the people who are contacting them. And I will let Jen answer that question.
Those are great, those were great points that you brought up. And, you know, one of the things that I would reiterate, as far as roads and law enforcement in the unincorporated areas, those are under the county's purview. The schools are operated by the school districts. They are completely autonomous from us. We don't have authority over them, although I have great relationships with those people. And with that rapport that I've worked hard to build, you know, when I have a suggestion or something, they listen to me. Same thing with the first responders. In the county, we have ESDs, and they are autonomous and completely separate from the county as well, from Comal County government. And so they do their strategic planning as well. And I am in great communication. I have my hours once a week out of the fire station. So I mean, I'm in the trenches with them and keeping tabs on what's going on with them. And there's some overlap too, for the sake of efficiency, when you talk about 911 and all of that. We are consolidated and everybody is in their own little kingdom on that. So there's a lot of things we do to be more efficient, but they also have their own authorities when it comes down to their planning, their strategic planning and stuff. And so they know we're all in communication. They know when these things are coming and how to adequately plan for them. And we work very well together, but we are separate pots as far as that goes. Now, for looking forward, you know, having more of a regional type of approach to stuff is a good thing. So like we're lumped in with the Alamo Area Metropolitan Organization, and that's for TxDOT projects and those types of planning. And you know, TxDOT is another great partner. And you know, with us being in the Alamo Area MPO, we have a seat at the table on that. As far as these other things that you asked, and with first responders and roads and stuff like that, or with the schools and stuff like that, we don't necessarily have a regional approach, and that is definitely room for improvement. And so just rapport alone isn't going to solve that, but it's a start.
About this developer that's doing this development. Are all the plans already completed? I know some, okay, that was my.
No, it has not been approved. There's been some preliminary stuff that has been proposed, and there's some conversations back and forth as far as corrections they need or different things that they have to do, but it has not been approved. Well, you can, and I encourage public participation. The thing is, by the time it gets to the court agenda, it's met all of the requirements, and they will not put it on the agenda before that. Right now, the fight is with the developer. If the developer was willing and able to change their plans and do what is statutorily and according to our subdivisions is once they fulfill all those requirements, if they can change what their plan is, that's where you can affect stuff. But once they've fulfilled all those things, it's not an emotional decision for us. No, I don't like the high density stuff at all. And the fragmentation of land bothers the heck out of me. I don't like it, but I can get that to you.
Stop now. I'm sorry, but we only have this room till 1:30.
But like I said, once it reaches the point of being on the agenda, it's basically a ministerial decision at that point.
Thank you all for coming. Please keep your interest.